Well, one thing we know about inflation is that it's getting a bit out of control. It's likely to exceed 11% in the UK. In Europe, latest numbers show it's already up to 8.6% and rising. It's about the same in the United States. In Australia, it's just 5.1%, but that was back in March. One common theme everywhere is it's going up. So central banks are officially in panic mode, pushing interest rates up as fast as they can. But what good will that do except for making poor people that much worse off and possibly unemployed? So isn't there a better way, particularly when it's not overconsumption driving inflation, it's a lack of supply? So today I asked Steve Keen, shouldn't we be tackling inflation with fiscal measures, not monetary policy? And what if we do nothing at all? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. Well, central banks are committed to using monetary policy to solve the inflation problem we're seeing all over the world. The Fed's Jerome Powell, the governor of the Federal Reserve, the central bank in the United States, has said they have an unconditional commitment to fight inflation. So much so that when he was asked at a House committee hearing a couple of weeks ago what he'd do if interest rates rose and inflation didn't come down, what would they do? He said they'd keep on going. They keep on lifting it. So not even entertaining the idea that it might not be the right thing to do, they would just keep on doing it even if it was the wrong thing. Is that the right way to fight inflation, Steve? It seems like your head's stuck in the sand, doesn't it?
It's the neoclassical way. I mean, we have
even if we're wrong, we're going to keep doing it, damn it, till we can show just how wrong we are.
Yep, that's what is likely to happen. The bastards will get away with it, unfortunately, which is what really pisses me off about these things. They can bring the economy to its knees. Completely fail to warn about a serious crisis, and then they're back on the talk shows half a year later, because they're supposed to have wisdom about these things.
So the OECD forecast for the UK next year is 0 GDP growth. Inflation's still over 7%. Unemployment's still quite low as well, though, but 4.3% up from 3.8% this year. So stagflation with jobs. Which, has that ever happened before? These are unusual circumstances. Stagflation normally means people are out of work, but we've got lots of jobs. We've just got very high inflation and no GDP growth. So this is, unusual times.
That's all the neoclassical forecast about the future. Let's not get carried away with their forecast becoming reality. What we need to do is backtrack and see why they think you can control inflation with interest rates. And that's always been the fixation of neoclassicals, going right back to the 1800s, because and this is where John Hicks played a major role in destroying the Keynesian revolution when it first happened, because Keynes argued that what determines investment is your expectations of future profit. And these are uncertain. So what you'll do is you rely upon current circumstances and extrapolate those forward, and therefore what is by far the most important determinant of your willingness to invest is your expectations of future profit. Now, what Hicks did is drag it back into the neoclassical world, where there's no uncertainty. Let's assume we know the future is a fairly typical neoclassical assumption. But what they then did was, well, if you don't have uncertainty about profits because you know the future stream of profits from every investment, what can you vary? The interest rate. So the idea was putting up interest rate would reduce investment because that was the only determinant you were left with. And they therefore saw a high level of dependence of investment upon the interest rate. When you look at it empirically, that is not the case.
But why do they want to get investment down? That doesn't make a great deal of sense to me.
That's the old neoclassicals. The new ones have generalized it and said it isn't just investment that's determined by the rate of interest, it's consumption. And they actually have a model in which before you go shopping, you take a look at the interest rate, and that'll vary what you're going to buy, because as well as going shopping for your current children, you're going shopping for you're considering what you're going to have as available as a bequest to your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren, whom, of course, you are planning with an infinite future. This is the typical rational person, plans with an infinite horizon. And this is the shit they come out with.
But isn't it more immediate than that? If interest rates are high, then I know that my mortgage is going to go, for those people who've got a mortgage, my mortgage is going to go up, and therefore I've got less money to spend on other things. So that will hit demand.
No, sorry, you can't bring the real world in here. Okay?
But I mean, that is what
will happen. Yeah. Okay, because again,
by default, isn't that help? Because obviously, all of this is about we've got a much higher demand than we've got supply right now. We've got to get the demand down to the level of supply so prices moderate. And if you say, well, okay, we're going to jack up interest rates, you're going to have less money in your pocket because you're going to be spending most of your income on your mortgage, and then that is going to hit demand.
It will hit demand.
What I do find bizarre is when people are saying, well, we can do this without having a hard landing. Because, I mean, if you're going to hit demand down to the levels of supply, you of course you're going to have a hard landing.
It always is a hard landing because, again, they see this stuff as like fine-tuning because they're looking at, if you put up the interest rate, you reduce the net present value of future cash flows, and therefore you reduce the number of projects which are profitable, so you have an attenuated decline in the investment given the rate of interest. The new business cycle loonies, the people into so-called rational expectations, which mean the capacity to accurately predict the future. That's the definition of rational. They generalise it to consumption, and therefore, you fine-tune people's consumption demand today by varying the interest rate, what they call the Euler equation, which is an insult to a great mathematician. But what actually happens is you slam on the credit-based demand. Now they think that there is no such thing as credit-based demand in their models because it's Steve lending to Phil. Steve can spend less, Phil can spend more, no net consumption, change in consumption, unless Phil is a much more profligate speller than Steve, which we both know is not true. And therefore what they do is they slam on a credit brake without even realising that it's there, and that's why they crunch the economy so severely.
Right, but I think they want to crunch the economy, don't they? Because they want to get that demand down. And I look at what it's doing to me. So I've got a fairly hefty mortgage because I'm quite old, so the bank insists I pay it back fairly quickly, and it's and I live in Surrey, so it's a big mortgage. I fortunately renegotiated a 5-year term late last year before things started to go wrong. I look at how much it would cost me now for that mortgage. Guess how much more per month I would have to pay to meet the conditions if I was taking out that mortgage now on a 5-year term. Have a guess how much more I'd be paying because it would.
£2,000 a month?
No, not £2,000 more, but £900 more per month extra.
I was going to go. I went for one. I thought I'd double it, but obviously I was better with me.
But I mean, even so, that's
1,000.
So that has an immediate impact. So even though I'm not paying that because I managed to negotiate a mortgage. What I am doing, though, is saying, right, I've got to overpay my mortgage. God, if this is around in 5 years when I have to renew my mortgage term, I want to make sure that I've paid off as much capital in the meantime. So I'm overpaying the mortgage by £1,000 a month, which is money that I could have been spending in the economy. If I hadn't done that and hadn't renegotiated, then I wouldn't be overpaying. I'd still be down by £1,000 a month because I'd be paying the extra money paying off my mortgage. So,
and also what
that's a big slug of income. So this is the real effect.
Big slug. Yeah, but it goes beyond that. Your thinking is about your micro level on that front, fair enough. But when you're paying that principal off more rapidly, you're actually destroying money in the process. Because to pay your principal off, your deposits go down and your loans go down.
Yeah.
But that actually means a reduction of the money supply. Now, the neoclassicals don't realise that. I gave a seminar with the Pakistan Institute for Development Economics
last week,
where I explained this basic logic that when you have, if credit is positive, there's a boost to aggregate demand. If it's negative, there's a fall in aggregate demand. And they're not even aware that's what's happening. So when they do something like put up interest rates and it does slam on people's purchasing and people do decide to pay their debt off, that reduces the money supply and it's negative for demand, $1 for dollar for the reduction in the money, which otherwise would have been spent. So it tends to be that they think the car's going to drive smoothly and it's driving like you've got a geriatric Mr. Magoo hitting the brakes and changing the gears badly. That's the situation.
But isn't that what they're trying to achieve? They're trying to cut down demand, aren't they? So by putting in,
they are, but it won't necessarily hit the inflation this time around because they're seeing it as a demand-driven inflation. And here again is where the theories lead them astray, because according to their theories, if you have a drop in demand, you'll have a drop in price. And it comes out of the fact that you're intersecting supply and demand curve, and you drag the demand curve back, then the price level falls as well as the amount being consumed falls. But when you look at actual firms making actual goods and ask them what are their cost structure like, the answer is their costs rise with falling output. So they're going to be squeezing the margins because in the real world, rather than economic textbooks, fixed costs are incredibly important. In mainstream theory, tend to think fixed costs are sort of 10% of the operating cost of a firm. They're actually closer to 40%. And then the variable costs fall with output, where the neoclassicals think they rise. So if you have falling output, your variable costs are going to rise as well. And that means that you're going to have a cost pressure on firms to put up their markups because they're going to lose out. They're going to have a higher cost of production.
So lower demand means higher prices. There's something to think about. We'll explore that more and a lot more besides in the full version of this podcast. If you want to hear that, you need to become a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof. Steve Keen, or you can subscribe at debunkingeconomics.com. That's it for this week. Back with another one next week. Thanks for listening.